You are a Pentagon general in 1959. Outside your window, the dew hasn't yet dried. On your desk, a report. The Soviets are testing a new missile. Your finger hovers, trembling, over the hotline. You know that if war breaks out, it will last 20 minutes. Then, ashes. That's why you're pouring millions into laboratories where physicists whisper about a beam. Invisible, instantaneous, inevitable. It doesn't explode. It doesn't roar. It simply erases the target, like an eraser on paper. You imagine a satellite burning up in orbit, a tank turning into molten metal, an enemy falling, without blood, without a scream, just the click of a Kodak camera, a flash, and silence. But what if this beam never killed? What if, instead of death, it began stitching torn retinas, cutting tumors without touching the skin, transmitting your voice across oceans through a thin glass fiber? You know the feeling when a laser beam at the clinic saves your eyesight. And yesterday, that same beam scanned the barcode on your milk, and today, it carries your call to a loved one. In 1961, Theodore Maiman assembled the first working laser, the size of a pack of cigarettes, a ruby crystal, 2 silver plates, a flash from an old camera. Physical review, letters refused to publish his work. Too simple, not scientific enough. Yet this crude device became a surgeon's scalpel, a robot's eye, the heart of the internet. Imagine, 95% of the world's traffic travels via lasers, not satellites, not radio, but light, trapped in glass. All of this is the legacy of the death ray, which chose not to kill but to connect. You use it every second, and you don't. Even notice, because the real miracle isn't in destruction, it's in how it remains imperceptible. 1951, Columbia, South Carolina, dawn, dew on a bench. Charlestown sits, staring into a puddle reflecting the sky. Beside him, Arthur Shallow. Both are silent. In their minds, the same question, how to make atoms sing in unison, not to shout discordantly, like a crowd, but like an orchestra playing a single note, pure, precise, powerful. Around them, mockery. You're building a musical box for electrons, colleagues scoff. But Townes knows, if light can be synchronized, it won't just be a wave. It will become an instrument, a blade, a voice. It all began with Einstein. 1917, he writes 4 pages that no one notices. In them, an idea, an atom, having absorbed energy, can emit light, but not on its own. It needs a push from another photon. And then, not just light will be emitted, but an exact copy, the same frequency, the same phase, the same direction. This is called stimulated emission. But for 40 years, this idea gathered dust in archives, until Townes built the Maser, a microwave amplifier. It worked. But visible light? That's more complex. It doesn't require metal or gas. It needs a crystal and madness. And then the Cold War enters the picture. The Pentagon allocates millions, not for science, for fear. A death ray sounds like science fiction, but if it's possible, the USA must build it, not the USSR. A $200 million budget, laboratories, grants, freedom. War sought a weapon. Science gained a tool. Imagine, without that money, no laser until the 1980s. Without the general's paranoia, no internet, no eyesight. Restored in 5 minutes, you use it every morning when you scan your face on your phone. And it all began with the terror of nuclear apocalypse. The theory is ready, the money too. But who will dare to build the laser? Not at MIT, not at Berkeley, but in Malibu, at Hughes Research Laboratories, where no one expects a breakthrough. One man works there, Theodore Maiman, 32 years old, no accolades, just a ruby crystal, 2 silver plates, and a flash from an old Kodak. Everyone believes ruby is a dead end, too inefficient, too simple. But Maiman doesn't believe in complexity, he believes in clarity. And in May 1961, he switches on the power, click, flash, and a beam, invisible to the naked eye but captured on film, the first in history. Not a weapon, not a miracle, but proof light can be tamed. You know that feeling when technology becomes so ingrained in life that it disappears? The laser is exactly that. It doesn't shout about itself. It just works. In your ear, in your eye, in your pocket. And it all began with 2 scientists on a bench and a general trembling over a telephone. May 1960, Malibu, Hughes Research Laboratories. In a corner, a table piled with wires and ruby scraps. Theodore Maiman, 32 years old, eyes sunken from sleeplessness. Around him, silence, not because it's empty, but because everyone has already given up. A laser? Come on, Charlie, that's a fairy tale for the military, they whisper behind his back. Meanwhile, at Bell Labs and IBM, they're building gigantic gas monsters, miles of tubes, magnets, vacuum, millions of dollars, and Maiman has a crystal the size of a pinky finger, 2 silver plates, and a flash from a Kodak bought at a local store for $50. He knows ruby isn't trash. In its lattice, chromium atoms await a signal. One click, and they will align like soldiers at attention, all waves, in sync, all photons, in one direction, all a single note, pure, sharp, undisturbed. Who will believe me, he thinks, checking the mirrors one last time. One is opaque, the second lets through 1 out of 10 photons. It's through this tiny gap that the beam will escape. Not white, not diffuse, but red. 694.3 nanometers, precisely targeted. Click, flash, and there, on the photographic film, a mark, not blurred, not accidental, but sharp like a razor blade. The first laser in history, smaller than a pack of cigarettes, budget $49,000, less than a meal for generals at the Pentagon. The world expected a weapon, thunder, fire, death from orbit, and it received a quiet click and a beam that doesn't kill, but sees, through fabric, through glass, through time. You use it when a doctor removes a mole without a scar, when your voice travels to Tokyo along a hair-thin fiber, when a scanner at the checkout reads a barcode in a fraction of a second. All of this is the legacy of that corner in Malibu, where one man defied the world. But here's the irony. When Maiman submitted his paper to physical review letters, it was rejected. Insufficient novelty. He looks at the film, at the beam, at his hands, and he understands science isn't just about discoveries. It's about who decides what's worthy of notice. Then he writes to Nature. And in August 1960, the world sees the laser for the first time, not as a weapon, not as a miracle, but as a tool. Simple, inexpensive, human. Imagine, you hold the future in your hands. It doesn't heat up, it doesn't hum, it doesn't require passwords. It just works, and no one believes it until they see it. That's why Maiman didn't become a hero. He became invisible, like the laser itself. And that is the highest form of victory. June 1960, Malibu. It's hot. In Maiman's hands, a letter. Physical review, letters, insufficient novelty. Not a mistake, not a misunderstanding, but a verdict. He looks at the ruby rod and doesn't recognize it, because it's a breakthrough. And they see a crude device. Have you ever felt the world ignore what you've created? As if you're screaming into a void and the echo remains silent. Physicists back then expected thunder, but the laser whispered. It didn't solve a war. It didn't conduct electricity. It didn't light up a dark room. It simply existed, pure, precise, without purpose. A solution in search of a problem, they laughed at conferences. In Hughes's archives, records still state, Maiman's project, an interesting toy. Not a weapon, not a breakthrough, a toy, and then triumph. Maiman didn't wait for mercy. He took the same article, the same film, the same click, and sent it to Nature. The British didn't ask what it was for. They asked, does it work? Yes, then publish. August 6, 1960, 1.5 pages, nothing superfluous, no fanfare, just turned it on, flash, beam, and that was it. But it was enough. A week later, a call from Moscow. 2 weeks later, Tokyo replicated the experiment. By the end of the year, 30 laboratories worldwide were building their own lasers, not by order, not for money, but because they saw this is a new language of light. And the first person to speak it wasn't a physicist, not an engineer, not a general, but a doctor. In 1961, the laser touched an eye for the first time, not to blind, but to restore sight. Imagine, you're lying in a clinic, you're in pain, you're scared, and then a quiet click, and the world returns. That's how the death ray became a scalpel, without blood, without a surgeon's trembling hands, just light, precise, like thought. You use it every time you have a retinal scan, every time a laser removes a scar on your skin, every time the light in fiber optics carries your voice to a loved one. It all started with a rejection, with a letter that was almost thrown away, with a scientist whom no one believed. But he knew a true breakthrough doesn't shout, it just works, and waits for the world to catch up. 1961, New York, operating room. A patient lies with a detached retina, a diagnosis that, in those years, meant a sentence blindness. Surgeon Dr. Charles Campbell holds a device resembling a camera. Inside, Maiman's ruby laser, a red beam, 694.3 nanometers. No one knows will it burn the eye or save it. Inhale, click, the beam touches the retina. It doesn't cut, it doesn't press. It vaporizes damaged cells and seals the tear like a needle and thread, but made of light. Adjacent cells, intact. The patient blinks, sees. You know that feeling when fear turns into a miracle in a split second? That's how the death ray first became a ray of life, not in a laboratory, not on a proving ground, but in a human eye. Why is the laser ideal for surgery? Because it focuses 100,000 watts of energy on a spot smaller than a cell. It doesn't cut, it erases. It doesn't burn, it fuses. And it does so with such precision that healthy tissue doesn't even feel the intrusion. A scalpel leaves a scar. A laser leaves sight. Today, 98% of retinal surgeries in the USA are laser-based, 70% of vision corrections without a single incision. Have you had such a procedure? Even if not, your insurance pays for it every year. But the cruelest irony is in the budget. The Pentagon spent billions to create a weapon that would destroy the enemy in 20 minutes. And the laser, born of this paranoia, now saves 300,000 eyes a year in the USA alone. The global market for laser medicine, $12 billion. Not for death, for sight, for skin without scars, for a voice returned after laryngeal cancer. The military dreamed of a beam that would burn satellites, and they got a beam that restores a child's ability to read. Imagine you're sitting in an ophthalmologist's office. You're 30, you're afraid of lenses. The doctor turns on the device, a quiet click. 5 minutes, and you see stars without glasses. This isn't magic. This is the same beam that, in 1959, made a general tremble over the telephone. But for the laser to stop being a rarity in clinics, it had to be miniaturized, made cheap, built into a pocket. And in 1962, it happened. Engineers at General Electric and IBM created the semiconductor laser, the size of a grain of sand, runs on a battery, costs pennies. This was the breakthrough that transformed the laser from a miracle into a utility, like water, like light, like the internet. Today, it's in every smartphone, in every data center, in every fiber under the ocean. And it all started with one eye, one click, one, what if it works? The laser didn't win the Cold War. It won the war for your eyesight, and it didn't even ask for a medal. 1962, Schenectady. 3 guys in jeans and t-shirts stand at a table covered with microchips. Robert Hall, Nick Holonyak, Marshall Nutt. No lab coats, no Einstein quotes, just a piece of gallium arsenide, black as coal, the size of a fingernail. They apply current, and suddenly, a beam, red, thin, pure. No Kodak needed, no lamps needed, just a battery and this crystal. The laser left the laboratory. It's now in your pocket. Why did this change everything? Because here, light is born differently. Current passes through semiconductor layers. Electrons jump to a lower energy level. In doing so, they emit photons, and the mirrored facets of the crystal reflect them back and forth. All waves move in sync, like soldiers in formation. The result, a coherent beam. Packaged in a chip less than a millimeter in size, consumes fractions of a watt, costs pennies. You use this every second, even if you don't know it. Imagine you scan a QR code in the subway, your phone flashes red. That's it, a descendant of that 1962 chip, the same principle, the same physics, only now in every smartphone, in every router, in every data center. By 1975, 80% of laser patents were solely for semiconductors, and yet just 10 years earlier, the laser was considered a toy. But here's the paradox. In the 70s, 300 laser patents were filed monthly. Not one for smartphones, not one for music on discs, not one for supermarket scanners. Everyone dreamed of death rays, of sights, of radars. But reality chose something else, quiet, imperceptible, every day. Today, 2 billion laser diodes are produced each year. Most will never see a human eye. They work in darkness, in wires, in circuit boards, like electricity, like air. You know that feeling when technology is so mundane that you don't notice it? That's the laser, not in a museum, not on a military proving ground, but in your ear when you listen to music through Bluetooth headphones, in your eye when a scanner recognizes your face, in your wallet when the checkout scans the barcode on your milk. All of this is the legacy of 3 guys at a table who simply wanted light to emerge from a piece of semiconductor. But the most insane twist is in the cables. Not in gadgets, in glass fibers under the ocean. Because as soon as the laser became miniature, scientists realized, what if we send this beam not through the air, but through glass? What if we turn light into a messenger, carrying your voice, your photos, your secrets across thousands of miles? And then the next era began. Not a laser for eyes, not a laser for war, a laser for communication, for the internet, for everything. 1970, corridors of Corning Glass Works. 3 engineers silently observe a glass fiber, thin as a hair, transparent as morning. Inside, a beam from a semiconductor laser. It traveled 17 meters. Losses, 20 decibels per kilometer, 100 times better than anything before. They don't hug, they don't call newspapers, they don't run to the boss. They simply look at each other and say, let's try 100 meters, because they understood. If light can travel through glass, then words, music, faces, everything can fly faster than sound, without interference, without delays, without borders. In just 7 years, Chicago will get its first commercial line, and the world a new nerve. How does it work? It's simple. The beam enters the glass at an angle and doesn't exit. It reflects off the walls like a ball in a pinball machine, rushes forward, and the laser, it's not just light, it's all waves in sync, like soldiers in formation. It can be turned on and off billions of times per second. On, 1, off, 0. That's how bits are born. That's how the internet is built. Today, a single fiber carries 100 terabits per second. That's a million movies, simultaneously, through a fiber thinner than a hair, under the ocean, under your feet, under cities, a total of 1,300,000 kilometers of cable, and every meter is alive with laser light. You know that feeling? When you click send and an email flies to Tokyo in a fraction of a second? You think satellites, clouds, magic. No. It's light in glass, quiet, silent, reliable. 95% of all planetary traffic goes this way, not by radio, not by air, but by laser trapped in a glass fiber. It doesn't shout, it doesn't blink, it doesn't demand attention. It just works. The military still builds death rays, spends billions, dreams of fire in the sky. But the real laser has for decades been the quiet pacemaker of civilization. It doesn't kill. It connects. Every second, every one of you. Imagine you're watching a video, calling your mother, paying for a coffee. All of this passes through that very beam, which in 1971 traveled 17 meters in a laboratory where 3 guys said, let's try 100. And everything changed, not with a roar, but in silence. You're sitting in a movie theater in 1953, on screen. Martians burn London with a green beam. You tremble in popcorn grease. And in 1964, Bond is on a table. A laser slowly cuts metal between his legs. You're an adult now, but the fear is the same. A laser is death, period. But reality? Reality laughs. In 1961, that same beam first touched an eye and restored sight. Didn't burn, didn't vaporize, but stitched like a thread of light. The military dreamed of cannons that would blast satellites, and they got a scalpel that removes cataracts in 5 minutes. Why? Because its power isn't in brute force, but in control. A laser doesn't tear. It focuses on a spot smaller than a cell, with a precision unattainable by steel. You use it when a doctor removes a mole without a scar, when your voice travels to Tokyo along a glass fiber, when a scanner at the checkout reads a barcode in an instant. All of this isn't a weapon, but a tool. Quiet, precise, imperceptible. Imagine Maiman's budget, $49,000, less than Bond's limousine. And today, the global laser market, $22 billion annually. And that's without counting the internet, without counting medicine, without counting your smartphone scanning your face every morning. Physicists back then scoffed, the laser, a solution in search of a problem. And today, 55,000 laser systems operate daily in U.S. hospitals alone. They don't shoot, they save. And the bitterest part? Physical review. Letters refused to publish the breakthrough, insufficient novelty. Yet, that very piece of ruby, 2 silver plates, and a $50 Kodak flash created an entire technological continent, without an explosion, without war, without a single scream. You know that feeling? When the future arrives not with a bang but with a click? As if the world changed and you didn't even notice, but it did change. And it all started with one person who didn't believe his beam was a weapon. He knew, it's a voice, it's sight, it's connection. And he was right. May 1960, Malibu. A table, a ruby, a Kodak flash. Maiman switches on the power, click, and a beam, not a weapon, not a triumph, but a simple fact, light can be tamed. It all began with 4 pages by Einstein, 1917, stimulated emission, the idea that an atom can be made to emit an exact copy of a photon, pure, synchronous, obedient. For 43 years it gathered dust, until Towns built the maser for microwaves, and Maiman for light. He didn't seek fame. He simply checked, does it work? Yes, you know that feeling, when you do something not for glory but because you cannot not do it? That's how the laser was born, rejected by physical review letters, published in Nature on 1.5 pages, and just a year later, in a patient's eye. Dr. Campbell aimed it at the retina, didn't burn, sealed, like a thread of light, and then the chip. The semiconductor laser, the size of a grain of sand, runs on a battery, costs pennies. That was the turning point. The laser stopped being a laboratory rarity. It became part of everyday life, like water, like air. And then, glass, Corning. 1970. 17 meters, then 100, then thousands of kilometers under the ocean, 95% of the internet via light trapped in a glass fiber. Your call, your email, your stream, all travel this way, not by satellite, not by radio, but by the beam that Maiman coaxed from a piece of ruby for $49,000. Maiman died in 2007. He was 79. In his last interview, he said, "I wasn't interested in weapons. I was interested in whether it could even be made to work." He never received a Nobel Prize. His name isn't in textbooks, but his beam is in your everyday. Every time you scan a QR code, that's it. Every time a doctor removes a mole without a scar, that's it. Every time you watch a video on the subway, that's it. Quiet, precise, imperceptible. Imagine you're sitting on a plane. You scan your boarding pass. The laser reads the code in an instant. You don't even notice. And yet, this is the legacy of that corner in Malibu, where one man defied the world, and won, not with a shout, but with a click. Today, lasers are involved in DNA analysis, in cutting steel, in recording discs, in facial recognition, in vision correction. All of this isn't thunder, not fire, not a death ray, but the quiet engine of progress. And here's a question, not for an answer, but for reflection. Will the technologies of the future be loud or quiet? Will they explode on screens or quietly integrate into your life? Perhaps the next breakthrough is already working under your feet in the cable that connects you to your mother in Tokyo. And perhaps that's why no one notices it. Because the real miracle isn't in destruction, but in how it remains imperceptible and works every second for you.